Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing well. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 6 review and as well as my Game Week 7 transfer plans. Now, in terms of Game Week 6, let's just quickly review each player. I think it's nice to sort of reassess my team right now after a terrible game week. As you can see, obviously above here, I probably would have gotten a gigantic red arrow, for the context of where I am in the game. I started the week in 32K. I'm now 137K, basically a 340, 360% rank drop. So it's quite monumental, but as I said, I've been very lucky this season, so I'm not too fussed about it. And I think the biggest thing to think about is obviously how do I feel about the state of my assets and how do I feel about them going forwards? And do I think I need, for example, a wild card and things like that? So in terms of actually just reviewing my assets, right? I'm by the way, I actually have 66 points as opposed to 59. I'm recording this video just before bonus points have been updated, getting bonus points from a couple players as well, such as Saka, such as Trippier. So those 7 points will come through as well. And not the worst game week, but clearly, where I am rank wise, the safety score was actually 81. So still a relatively bad game week, right? 15 points behind the safety score. And some people, flew by 100 points. Some people, I don't think some people would have done too much worse than me. So it is what it is. I'm still happy to have done Chilwell to Trippier. And when you actually look at my team, obviously Trippier is, the prime asset here in the defense. But Gusto has now become a huge problem because he's gotten a red card. And he's, just as bad as a pick of Chilwell. The difference I would say with Gusto is that Chilwell is probably close to on the price fall. So I would have been pressured to make a Chilwell transfer tonight. Whereas in the sort of luxury position that I have, with a -2, of course, acknowledging that, I think Gusto, I don't feel any pressure at all to move out of him. But the way I see it is actually my defense for the next 2 weeks isn't particularly good. And actually, my plans always was to go Gusto to another defender. Maybe it's actually Botman, maybe it's Dallo, and we'll talk about that later in transfer plans. As far as, Pickford, yes, of course, another bad performance because really he only conceded one shot and then actually, didn't save it, didn't parry it. It rebounded off the post and became a goal. Otherwise, actually, Everton, their expected goals conceded in the last few matches has been relatively low. So I think the fact that we haven't seen a clean sheet so far for Pickford, I would say, is a little bit unlucky. And ultimately, when you look forward into next week, Luton at home and then Bournemouth at home, I can't pass up the opportunity to actually give Pickford, these two chances because this is how I see things, right? I look at fixtures and I give the chances to my players based on fixtures. So I think Pickford will stay. Estupinan's an interesting one where once again they lose the clean sheet, and honestly for not a very good reason, right? Because Verbruggen effectively just gave a free goal away to Solanke, and when you look at it, I mean Estupiñán could have easily got a clean sheet today, so he himself could have gotten a relatively good haul. And going forwards, he's not really a problem because it feels like unless we continue to see benchings from Estupiñán, I do think that, with the odd rest here and there, which is just necessary because these players are playing so many games of football and to sort of play out the way that Roberto De Zerbi does, they do need rest eventually, right? We saw Mitoma even come off the bench today, which is something that's normal because even though he's the most important player on the team, he needs that rest because he will be playing cup fixtures here and there. So that's my defense. And then in terms of Saliba and Udogie, right? The interesting thing, obviously, if I scroll down here is, their value really comes in the back half of the season. So, or the back half of the first part of the season. So Saliba, for example, very good player in Game Week 10, a good player next week for me. So I'm definitely playing him next week. And then Udogie as well from Game Week 8 onwards is a very, very good pick. So actually, when I look at my defense, I'm happy with all the players except for Gusto. So Gusto could be a transfer out, but I still need to actually cover the cracks that I have in my team in Game Week 7 and 8. And so that's something I need to be conscious of. So that's what my immediate plans are, right? Trying to fix the biggest issue in my team. And obviously it presented itself within a red card. So, there's a shiny little warning sign here for Gusto, basically telling him, and me, myself as a manager, of course, that I need to deal with him. Now, in the midfield, you'd probably argue that I have some issues there as well. So when I look at the midfield, Fernandes scoring is nice, but we also know that he can play variable positions from game to game, and that's not very lovely. Now, with Rashford, I think the scariest thing with players like Rashford and Sterling is that even though we know that they can be great picks on their day, the issue, of course, is that their team overall aren't creating enough chances, right? When you look at the expected goals that Chelsea have performed, post the Luton game or the United team has recently outside of the Bayern Munich game, ironically, it's been rather poor. I think the interesting thing is on Game Week 7, because the competing picks that I have in my mind to sort of replace Rashford and Sterling are clearly Son and Madison. Now, Son and Madison have, in my opinion, still a bad fixture versus Liverpool. We will see what happens going forwards, but I would say Son and Madison is quite tough to sort of go into in Game Week 7 because, as I said, I have major issues in defense. And I'll talk about that when I kind of show my team and plan it out. but that's what I have in my mind. So Rashford and Sterling, because Rashford actually has a home fixture versus Crystal Palace, and then Sterling has a good game versus Fulham away. Even though Fulham have gotten 2 clean sheets lately, I would say that Fulham have been a little bit on the lucky side to get those clean sheets, and you could argue as well they haven't been facing high quality offenses, right? Because if you guys remember when we did the Game Week 5, what we've learned, this Crystal Palace team is still a team that we consider to be a weaker attack. And as far as obviously Luton Town, I mean, that's very clearly the case. They're a bottom quadrant team when it comes to, being a poor attack and also a poor defense. As far as Saka and Mbumo, I'll still be keeping them. And actually, I think the prevailing logic that I'll keep going forwards is that I'm probably likely to keep the penalty takers in this team. The only change would really be, as I said, if I go Son to Madison, the penalties are probably between those two, and actually getting both of them would cover me from the Spurs penalties as well. So I kind of like the idea of really going for Son and Madison. And when we look at the Spurs fixtures here, this is an opportunity to just sort of reassess. Yes, of course, I think Liverpool at home is nice because it's at least a home fixture and you're not playing at Anfield. But I still think, for example, it will be a tough game. Liverpool, obviously, we see them as a very poor defense, but I don't think that they're as poor defenses as the community thinks. And so I'm not seeing, for example, an explosive game from Son and Madison. Now, they could easily explode, but I'm just thinking, when's the best time to bring them in? And probably the best time to bring them in is Game Week 8 as opposed to Game Week 7. And that's just my immediate thoughts. I don't want to be too rash. So, ironically, obviously, I'm going to plan to transfer Rashford out. But as far as the forwards, as far as Haaland and Alvarez, I think Alvarez was very unfortunate because he actually had a good game on paper, 55 minutes, where he was subbed off simply because Rodri had to do what he did. Rodri has a red card now, but Alvarez is unlikely to be put in a situation where he's an early substitute because of game state, right? 10 versus 11 made the situation so that Julian Alvarez was a potential transfer out because you always have to take an attacker out when you're trying to park the bus. And so with Haaland and Alvarez, I'm not concerned about them going forward. So in fact, the question, I suppose, is also, now that my most interesting transfer targets are actually Son and Madison, I'm not too fussed about going into Salah immediately because even though Salah did well this week, which is something that we always expect, the question is obviously, can you do better with maybe a different arsenal of 5 midfielders? Because let's say if you went for Salah, unless you went for Anthony Gordon this week or maybe Neto, it's very likely as well that you could have moved into players who blanked, right? Players like Diaby didn't have a particularly great week overall. And so that's something that I have to keep in mind. And on top of that, in terms of the forwards, I have no interest in actually going towards Morris because I don't plan to do an early wildcard still. And, going to Morris would probably mean that I have to wildcard because that's also a transfer out. It's also a kind of sucker up of budget. And I'm not planning to Morris captain either. So I don't see too much of value to go into Morris next week, other than the fact that he's going to give you a lot of solidity from just, appearing in the 2 fixtures and getting you 4 points like so. So that's my immediate thoughts with the team. So why not show the transfer plans going forwards? So in terms of transfers, I think the immediate transfer, as I said, is going to be Gusto. And I'm probably going to be going into Dallo or either Botman, right? So these are the 2 players. Now, in terms of Botman first, I think the interesting thing is he doesn't have a particularly good game versus West Ham. So on Game Week 8, one of the issues that I have is that I don't have a particularly great team for Game Week 8, right? Because Saliba is going to be playing versus Man City, and then Estupiñán himself is going to be playing versus Liverpool. So I've only got 2 good defenders on that week. It's Udogie and Trippier. Now in Game Week 7, the issue that I have is I would say Estupiñán still has a bad fixture. It's Aston Villa away, right, when we look at fixtures. And then obviously Saliba can be played. And on the other hand, Udogie can't really be played because he's playing versus Liverpool. So clean sheet chances aren't really there. And on those 2 weeks, I actually need a defender. So ironically, I think even though United stink, I would like to probably go into Dallo, right? Plan to go into Dallo this week. And then on Game Week 8, I actually quite like the idea of taking a -8. I know this sounds ludicrous, but I don't really mind taking a -8 and maybe just going out of Rashford and Sterling just so I can move into Son and Madison. Now, if I wasn't so rash, I would probably just instead go into someone like Madison instead. But as you can see, it's very tight in terms of budget. So maybe Dallow's not the one. I'll have to reassess and potentially I might even have to wildcard, right? If I was sort of forced in terms of price. Because the one thing I would say is maybe holding into Rashford makes a little bit more sense just so you can actually capture that Game Week 9 game. And then maybe I can wildcard out of Rashford in Game Week 10. Now, the interesting thing with Rashford is that I do think it feels odd. I think all wildcards feel quite odd, where if, let's say, if you're wildcard in Game Week 10, you probably don't want to start with that Man City game, but actually he's got such a good fixture on Game Week 12. You might want to actually keep your Man United assets then. So it's a question about maybe if I don't wildcard at all, I can actually just keep Rashford, Saka, Fernandes for the time being, and then maybe also replace one of them for Son in the future. But it's hard to do so with Son getting some more price rises. So I need to also think about how my team is restricted in terms of budget, because as I said, Madison and Son are the priority transfer targets, and unless I have the chance to, for example, go into Reguilon, who seems injured, that's the only opportunity I have to, let's say, really move into Son with a bit more flexibility in my bank, right? Where I can go Rashford to Son and then maybe not be so concerned. But that game week 12 fixture is still very, very good. Overall for Spurs, though, I think this just general run is beautiful. So getting triple Spurs is maybe a priority, and maybe I have to even wildcard to sort of get towards there. But yeah, I think a United defender is just nice just to cover game week 7 and 8, where you have two home fixtures at the very least. We know that this United team is more than capable of getting clean sheets, very jammy ones at that, at home. And so that's something I think I can do to paper over the cracks, but there needs to be some serious planning done in terms of how I get to Madison and Son. And maybe it's the case that I'm overreacting on Rashford. I know last week a lot of people were thinking at least that they wanted to keep Rashford over Fernandes, but then Fernandes has done well. I even in my wildcard draft suggested Fernandes, but I'm not 100% certain, that's the right answer. Each week we can have a Rashford goal, and then the next week we can have a Fernandes goal. Whereas with Son and Madison, it feels like you're getting so much more consistency there. And we might be overreacting as well, because we're just coming off of a week where Son just blanked previously, and then now he's coming into this North London derby game and getting 2 goals. And we might even be cooled off of Son in Game Week 7. So I would like to give it some more time to think about my midfield. I think maybe I don't need to overreact. First of all, a defender transfer is something that I need, and I also need to think about what that defender transfer does in terms of my budget for my midfield. So in the meantime, I'll be looking for either Botman, Reguilon, or as I said, Dalot. But Dalot could obviously impinge my team from a budget perspective, and obviously I have a very strong defense when it comes to budget for now, so that's something I need to think about too. And that's going to be my immediate thoughts. As I said, I'm not that high on really going towards Salah, and the biggest thing, and the reason why I say that is because on game week 10, I would say, or when you, let's say, compare, let's say, Haaland and Salah captaincies, right? So let's quickly look at Salah. So from game week 9, I think that's a very good fixture, but Haaland himself has an okay fixture as well in game week 9. And then in game week 10, this is the one where he has a much better fixture than Haaland. So you actually really want to be going for a Salah captaincy here, probably if you own Salah on your team, right? This is Nottingham Forest at home versus Haaland's Man United away. However, because players like Saka and players like even Odegaard have such a good fixture, Sheffield United at home, I do think that Saka can be a rival towards the Salah captaincy. And if that's the case, then really there aren't any significant weeks where I would say there's such a huge edge for going towards Salah as a captaincy option. And if you're not planning to captain Salah most of these weeks, then actually there's no value really in going towards Salah, is the immediate thought that I have. Because another reason why I went into a player like Trippier is he is actually still the best defender. Yes, he's expensive, but he is worth that expense. And I actually quite like keeping Trippier for this run overall. So those are my immediate thoughts. Cash is obviously an interesting option too. I mean, I might even move towards Cash as well. I didn't actually talk about Cash because Cash doesn't have a great game week 7, but who knows? I mean, I could just move into Cash and maybe just short circuit the need to really go into a wild card at all. Because if I go Cash, I would probably actually still save a little bit more money than I would, let's say, going into Dalot. And then by going into Cash, I can actually go quite easily into Rashford to Son, even if there's some price rises in the future. Because if I go Sterling to, let's say, a Madison, right, on game week 8, hopefully by that time I still have enough money in the bank to get into Son. Now, 0.1 might not be enough, but we're obviously hoping that is the case. I do think Madison will probably rise. I'm not sure if he'll rise ahead of next week. Son is probably going to rise to 9.2, so it might be tight there. But also, if I'm taking -4 in game week 8, then I wouldn't be too worried about that anyways. So those are my immediate thoughts. As I said, let me know what you guys think in terms of defender transfers. Do you think it just makes sense to go into Cash instead, and then maybe he can just plug a hole in my team? Or should I just think about Madison and Son in the short term? Would you actually prefer, for example, a Game Week 7 wildcard just to actually move into the midfield of choice? Because one thing I want to think about too is not overreacting, right? We saw, for example, Phil Foden blank for a couple of weeks in a row, and suddenly he drops an 11-pointer, which is actually expected from a player of his quality in an easy fixture. So with Raheem Sterling, I don't think the fixture is terrible. With Rashford, for example, the fixture is terrible for Game Week 7. So I don't necessarily want to just jump straight into Tottenham just to overreact from the North London derby. And, for example, I could have done the exact opposite, right? If, for example, we were wildcarding last week, looking at that Sheffield game, looking at, how do you say, for example, Son dropping a stinker, you would not have wildcarded Son last week. And maybe we're just overreacting too much as a community. Or maybe the case is that, really, as I said a couple of weeks back, we've got 10 midfielders that are amazing. And it's very, very hard to actually make the right decisions each week. You're just kind of hoping that you get lucky as well. So I think, as I said, some patience is needed, but a defender transfer is even more needed. So for Game Week 7, that's my transfer plans in mind, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. In terms of reacting to red arrows, I think you just need to take a little bit of rest, right? Just react to the games, react to your team, think about how valid the options are going forwards. Do they still have a chance of holding? And I would say use Phil Foden as a great example, right? He's someone who can still do great. In terms of Trippier and Botman, swings are important, fixtures are important. A lot of people were cold on Newcastle and suddenly they've just dropped a 7-0. These are the kind of things that we expect in FPL, and playing by fixtures, playing by patience is very helpful. I've taken 2 red arrows in a week now. I probably need to reassess even further, but these are my immediate thoughts. If you guys would like to like and subscribe, that would be absolutely lovely. And I hope you guys have had better weeks than me, and we'll hopefully get some better weeks going forward. So take care, guys, and I'll see you guys next week.